My name is Ava Morgan, 31 years old, currently living in Miami, Florida. And if you think my New Year's Eve would look like everyone else's, crowded with laughter, glasses of wine, and fireworks exploding across the night sky, you'd be mistaken. One afternoon in early December, as the late-year sun stretched across the surface of Biscayne Bay, my phone buzzed with a group text from my mother and father. Just a few short words. This year we're only inviting Brookside, keeping it cozy. I stared at the screen, my eyes tracing each word, my heart tightening even though I was more than used to this by now. Once again, I had been crossed off the guest list, cut out of what people call ringing in the new year together. I drew in a long breath, pressed my lips into a thin smile, and typed back 2 words. Happy New Year. Sent. Calm on the outside, but inside the chill sank deep into my chest. What they had no idea about was that this message no longer broke me the way it used to. I had long since stopped waiting for them to open their arms to me. Because somewhere off the southern coast of Florida, about 70 miles from Miami, I held a secret I had never revealed. A private island worth $7 million, built quietly with sweat and persistence, and the only place I ever truly felt I belonged. On the island stood a wide dock, a modern wooden home facing the open sea, palms swaying gently in the wind, and, most importantly, a peace I had never known in my entire childhood. Just this morning, before my mother's text arrived, I had received a confirmation call from the charter company in Coconut Grove. The 110-foot yacht I booked was ready, the crew was standing by, the banquet was set, and the wine was already chilling in the cabin. I remember laughing as I typed, Happy New Year, back to them, because that reply wasn't really a greeting, it was a period at the end of years of being pushed aside. If they thought I would once again sit in my small apartment, watching Miami's fireworks through the window like all the years before, then this time they were wrong. Tonight, I would open the gates of my private island and invite every single person who had ever been left behind, who had ever heard the words, "This year, just Brooke's family," who had ever been squeezed onto the cramped side table while Brooke and her family took the spotlight at the main one. I would take them out under glowing lights aboard the yacht, dock at the island, and count down together to the new year with music, waves, and fireworks bursting over the Florida Keys sky. And when the photos, the videos, the laughter, and the clinking glasses on the yacht's deck spread across social media, without their names or faces in any of it, I knew my phone would not stop ringing. They would call, they would text, they would panic as they realized the Morgan family party they once controlled was now happening without them. But for me, this wasn't revenge. It was the first time I was rewriting my own story. Tonight, I would no longer stand in the background. Tonight, the fireworks would say for me what I could never say out loud. Ava is no longer abandoned. Ava built her own table, and every person worthy of it has a seat there. Have you ever been crossed off the list, felt like the New Year's bells were ringing and you didn't exist at all? If you have, then you understand why I chose this path. Before I continue, tell me where you are listening from so I know I am not alone on this journey. I grew up in Tampa, Florida, in a beige 2-story house at the end of a street shaded by tall oak trees, where summer nights buzzed with cicadas and neighbors often gathered for backyard BBQs. From the outside looking in, the Morgan family was considered picture perfect. My father, Charles, a well-known insurance broker, my mother, Linda, always impeccably dressed with a wide smile just big enough to cover every crack, and their 2 daughters. But anyone who truly knew our family understood one thing: there was only one star in that house, and it was my younger sister, Brooke. I, Ava, was nothing more than the shadow standing behind her spotlight. By the time I was 10 and Brooke was 8, the divide in how our parents saw us was already clear. Brooke was always introduced with glowing words, beautiful, graceful, a natural leader. I, on the other hand, was introduced in the simplest way. This is Ava, Brooke's sister. Nothing more. That sentence became the refrain of my childhood, fixing me permanently into a supporting role no one wanted. New Year's Eve in Tampa was always loud and extravagant. Our house brimmed with neighbors, friends, and relatives. My parents hired catering services, ordered champagne, and decorated the living room with silver and gold balloons, all to set the stage for Brooke to wear her princess dress and shine like the heroine of a grand party. I remember vividly when I was 12, just minutes before midnight, I was in the kitchen slicing fruit and arranging another tray of desserts because more guests had shown up than expected. The scent of caramel and chocolate filled the air, my hands sticky with sugar, when the countdown echoed from the living room. 10, 9, 8. And then the whole room erupted. Happy New Year, Brooke. Because right at that moment, my mother raised a glass to celebrate her daughter's latest accomplishment, being chosen as captain of the high school cheer squad. I stood behind the kitchen door, the knife slipping slightly in my hand, and it hit me. I wasn't counting down for myself. I was counting down the seconds for someone else's spotlight. Brooke was placed at the center of every moment, while I drifted to the edges. When I became fascinated with books about the ocean, jotting down notes about coral reefs, and dreaming of one day working in marine conservation, my parents only gave a half-hearted smile. "She just likes playing in the water, she'll grow out of it." Meanwhile, when Brooke said she wanted to study law, the entire family immediately began planning how to build her application summer programs, debate clubs, anything to give her an edge. I remember nights sitting alone on the front porch, the glow from the living room spilling out through the window, music blaring, my parents' laughter rising whenever Brooke told another story about school. In my hands was a book on the coral reefs of the Florida Keys, the pages wrinkled from humidity, and I couldn't help but wonder if anyone in that house truly cared about what I thought. When I was 15, our family moved from Tampa down to Fort Lauderdale for my father's new job and, as he put it, a better school environment for Brooke. The decision was made without a single thought for me, even though I was already part of a youth science program at my old school that I loved. But by then, I was used to not being factored into the big family plans. We moved into a wealthier neighborhood closer to the beach, and the New Year's Eve parties only became more dazzling. Brooke had already become a star, cheer captain, dating the popular boy, a future sketched out in bright colors. I, on the other hand, grew quieter, retreating into myself, spending more time in marine science clubs and volunteering for coral restoration projects off the coast of Key Largo. I found joy in diving beneath the clear blue water, touching the living limestone structures, and feeling useful in a way no one in my family seemed to notice. But even when I did get the chance to share, like the time I won an award at a regional science fair with my project on marine ecosystems, my parents only nodded politely and said, "That's good, honey, but don't stay up too late." Then, almost in the same breath, they turned to Brooke, praising the speech she was preparing for her upcoming debate competition. I grew used to my story ending before it even began. I stopped trying to add my voice to the toasts because I knew no one would ever respond. The most painful memory was a New Year's Eve when I was 17. I had spent the whole afternoon baking a lemon tart, hoping to surprise everyone with something special. I carefully arranged thin slices of lemon like petals across the top, set it on the dessert table, and waited, hoping my mother might notice and give me just one word of praise. But when everyone gathered in the living room, my father raised his voice. "Let's toast to Brooke. She just got her acceptance letter from the University of Florida's pre-law program." The room erupted in cheers, glasses clinking, confetti filling the air. I stood in the background, my hands still smelling of lemon, the tart sitting untouched on the kitchen counter. Quietly, I cut myself a small slice, the sweet tang melting on my tongue, but inside it tasted bitter. My New Year's Eve ended once again with everyone celebrating someone else, while the chair meant for me sat empty in the crowd. Maybe it was those very moments that carved a wound too deep to erase. I grew up believing I was only there to count the seconds, so someone else could step into the light. I never blamed Brooke, she was simply living the role she had been handed. What hurt was my parents' choice to orbit endlessly around one star and leave me wandering in the shadows. Little by little, I learned to shrink my dreams, hide my accomplishments, and turn myself into someone invisible inside my own home. Yet it was that very invisibility that lit a different fire inside me. I began to crave a place where I wouldn't have to stand in the kitchen, where I wouldn't be stuck at the side table, where I wouldn't have to bite my lip and swallow the silence of toasts, never meant for me. Leaving Fort Lauderdale after high school graduation, I carried with me a burning determination to carve out my own path, one that had nothing to do with Brooke's spotlight or my parents' judgment. I was awarded a full scholarship in environmental engineering at the University of Florida in Gainesville, and for me, that was the first proof that my dream of the ocean was never foolish. Life in the dorms, far from home, wasn't easy, but it was there that I found freedom. I could bury myself in books on marine ecology, learn how to analyze water samples, study currents and storm cycles. On late nights, while Brooke posted pictures from another party, I sat alone in the lab, watching data scroll across the screen, and felt myself moving closer to a world that was entirely mine. After graduation, I moved down to Key Largo to join a young marine technology group focused on underwater sensor systems. It was still a fairly new field, blending environmental science with technology, where engineers like me could deploy small devices on the seafloor to monitor water quality, salinity, currents, and even the changes in coral reefs. I quickly realized this was fertile ground, an area where technology could achieve what governments or nonprofits often struggled with, providing real-time data to predict and respond to natural risks. I threw myself into the work, spending hours diving offshore to check equipment, my skin bronzed by the sun, my hands calloused, but my heart racing with excitement. From that experience, the idea for my own startup began to take shape. SeaPulse. I envisioned a network of sensors stretched along Florida's coastline, capable of measuring water quality, forecasting currents, and, most importantly, modeling hurricane risks. I wanted to build a nervous system for the ocean, where every shift in the environment would immediately transmit data to a central system, warning coastal communities and local authorities. I pooled together what little savings I had, borrowed a small amount from a startup support fund, and got to work. No office, no full team, just me, a laptop, and a handful of friends who shared the same vision. But starting a business in America was never a rosy dream. In the very first year, we almost collapsed when a storm swept through and carried away nearly all of our offshore test equipment. I stood on the dock, watching the broken pieces wash ashore, feeling as if my own faith had been buried with them. We lost a small contract with a research institute because we no longer had data to deliver. To keep SeaPulse alive, I had to take on extra work as a diving instructor for tourists, just to cover the rent for my cramped Miami apartment and put food on the table. Most nights, dinner was canned noodles or leftover pizza from the shop down the street, and there were moments I asked myself, was I chasing an illusion? Yet, every time I dove beneath the surface and saw coral reefs growing weaker, or currents carrying streams of plastic waste, I reminded myself, if I gave up, who would step in to do this work? The turning point came more unexpectedly than I ever imagined. A presentation at a small conference in Miami caught the attention of representatives from Miami-Dade County. They were searching for solutions to manage coastal risks, especially beach erosion and flooding after hurricanes. SeaPulse had the potential to provide real-time data, helping them make faster and more accurate decisions. After several rounds of negotiations, I secured my first significant contract enough to keep the company alive. Soon after, a chain of beachfront resorts in the Florida Keys reached out, wanting to use our services to safeguard their infrastructure and reassure their guests. When I signed those contracts, my hands trembled, unable to believe that the dream I once scribbled in a journal had become clauses worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. From there, SeaPulse began to find its place. We expanded our team of engineers, purchased more equipment, and built an online platform to display the data. Local weather broadcasts even started citing figures from SeaPulse. I no longer worried about making rent each month, but more importantly, I could see my idea genuinely helping the community. That was the moment I knew I was finally on the right path. After 3 years, a venture capital fund approached me with an offer to buy a portion of SeaPulse's shares to expand operations along the entire east coast of the United States. I agreed to sell a small stake enough to secure steady funding while still keeping control. The day the money hit my account, I sat in silence. I didn't rush into shopping sprees or lavish parties. Instead, I thought back to the dream I had carried through all those New Year's Eves as a child, to have a space of my own, a place where I wouldn't be pushed to the sidelines. I began searching, and then a discreet listing on the private real estate market led me to a small island in the upper Florida Keys. The price tag was $7 million. I knew instantly this was the answer to all those forgotten years. I formed an LLC Morgan Tides to purchase the island, keeping the entire transaction hidden from my family. I signed stacks of legal documents, worked closely with attorneys, and made sure everything was insured and compliant with coastal building regulations. The day I signed the transfer papers, I felt as though I had closed a long chapter of my life. From the girl who once stood in the kitchen watching others raise their glasses, to a woman with her own island, finally able to set her own table. The day I first set foot on the island, the sun was sinking over the Florida Keys, its light stretching across the dark blue water like golden ribbons. I stood on the small boat of the real estate broker, my legs trembling as we pulled up to an old wooden dock weathered by salt and time. But I didn't see decay, I saw a promise. The land was recorded in Monroe County's property registry since the 1972, and now I had the chance to turn it into the place I had always dreamed of. I signed the purchase papers through Morgan Tides LLC, the limited liability company I had created to keep my identity private. The sellers agreed to confidentiality clauses, never disclosing the buyer's name, and just like that I became the legal owner of an island less than 30 acres wide, but to me, it was an entire universe. In the weeks that followed, I worked non-stop with engineers and architects to ensure everything complied with the Florida Building Code. This couldn't just be a retreat, it had to withstand the fierce storms that were a constant reality in these waters. We built a large teakwood home, a material durable and resistant to humidity, coated in protective paint against salt. The roof was made of wind-resistant alloy, the windows reinforced glass imported to withstand gusts up to 150 miles per hour. I didn't want a house that was flashy or ostentatious, but one that was solid and warm, a design that blended into nature instead of forcing itself upon it. I installed a dual power system. A backup diesel generator combined with solar panels spread across the roof and along the island's western ridge, where the sun hit the strongest. Beneath the ground, a large freshwater tank connected to a rainwater filtration system ensured complete self-sufficiency. I hired a local team of engineers to build a new dock from hardwood, long enough to moor a mid-sized yacht, yet still retaining a rustic charm. Every time I stepped onto that dock, I felt as if I were crossing a threshold from the old world where I had been forgotten to a new one I had built with my own hands. Inside the house, I didn't choose marble or sparkling crystal like the showy mansions in Miami. I chose teakwood furniture with a warm honey tone, sturdy leather chairs, and hand-woven Navajo rugs I ordered from a small shop in New Mexico. The living room opened wide with panoramic glass walls facing the bay, so that in the mornings sunlight flooded in, and at night the moonlight shimmered across the water like silver. In every corner of the home, I left space for nature to step in. The wind, the light, the scent of salt, the rhythm of waves. I wanted this place to be a reminder that I didn't need to chase anyone else's standard, I only needed to live true to myself. I also set aside a discreet storage room just for fireworks. Not the smuggled or dangerous kind, but legally sourced fireworks from a licensed professional company certified by the state of Florida and compliant with every safety regulation. I signed detailed contracts specifying the quantities, the launch schedule, the supervision team, and emergency fire control measures. Because I knew the day would come when this place had to blaze with light, and those fireworks would not only welcome a new year, but also speak for me a silent, yet resounding declaration. And then, I hung a great bronze bell at the end of the dock. It wasn't meaningless decoration, but a symbol I chose for my own life. Along its side, I had a small inscription engraved. Every toll marks a boundary crossed. I told myself that every time I pulled the rope and let the bell ring, it meant I had shed another old shell, taken another step away from the shadow of being left behind. The first time I struck it, the sound echoed across the bay, mingling with the cries of seagulls, and it sent chills down my spine. I knew then that from this moment forward, no one but me would decide where I stood. On nights at the island, I often sat alone on the balcony, watching the distant glow of fishing boats flicker across the dark sea. Wrapped in a heavy blanket, listening to the wind whistle through the palms, I felt as though I had finally found my true home. No more laughter rising from a living room that called out someone else's name, no more glasses clinking in toasts that were never meant for me. Here, I had my own table, a chair reserved for me, and a bronze bell that reminded me my life would never again depend on someone else's invitation. That afternoon, after settling into the wooden chair on my island balcony, I poured myself a glass of wine and gazed out toward the distant horizon. My parents' exclusionary text replayed in my mind like a cut that hadn't yet healed. But instead of sitting there dwelling on the hurt, I decided to dial the first person I knew would always tell me the truth, Grandma May in St. Petersburg. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice raspy but still full of life. I asked her directly, "Grandma, were you invited to the New Year's party this year?" On the other end came a short laugh, void of any joy. "No," they said, "maybe next time." In more than 30 years, I've never once been left out, but this year it happened. I guess they only need Brooke and her family. I gripped my glass tighter, a sharp ache running through my chest, but at the same time, a different kind of determination stirred inside me. Next, I called Aunt Caroline in Nashville. She sighed the moment she heard my question. "Ava, I wasn't invited either. They said they wanted to keep it cozy, just immediate family." Which, of course, means just Brooke again. After that, I reached out to my cousin Liam in Atlanta, who had long shaken his head at the favoritism in our family. He gave a dry chuckle. "Not invited, obviously. I'm used to it, so I can't say I'm surprised." Every year, all the spotlight goes to Brooke. My cousin Zoe in Orlando shared the same fate, texting back, "They said the guest list is restricted this time, only inviting Brooke's side." I'm a little hurt, but I guess I should be used to it by now. When I set the phone down, I sat in silence, staring at the sea shimmering under the hues of sunset. The tightness in my chest slowly gave way to a rare clarity. This was no longer just my story. Half of the family had been pushed aside, all so the spotlight could remain fixed on Brooke and my parents. Those so-called family reunions were nothing more than one-sided stages. Instantly, I remembered all the years I had been placed at the side table while the main table was reserved for the important ones. And in that moment, I understood, this New Year's Eve, I would end that cycle once and for all. There would be no main table and no side table. There would only be one table, a table for those who truly wanted to be present, not because of an invitation, but because they chose to share the moment together. That very night, I opened my laptop and began drafting a detailed plan. First, logistics. I contacted the charter company in Coconut Grove I had worked with a few months earlier. I booked a 110-foot yacht, large enough to host an elegant yet intimate celebration, along with a tender boat to ferry guests from the main vessel to the island. I emphasized strict safety standards. Everything had to comply with U.S. Coast Guard regulations, with a personal flotation device for every guest, and a manifest prepared and submitted to the captain at least 24 hours before departure. Next, I worked with a professional event team. I signed contracts for 2 security personnel to ensure no incidents on board, as well as a paramedic to be on standby in case of medical emergencies. I didn't want any risk turning joy into disaster. I also made sure the entire event was covered by liability insurance, a requirement many people overlook. I knew that if I was going to do this, I had to do it thoroughly. This was not just a party. It was a declaration that we were worthy of having a seat at the table. After that, I drafted electronic invitations, each with a personalized QR code. Every QR would be scanned when guests checked in at Dinner Key Marina in Coconut Grove. I wrote clearly in the invite, free parking available at the lot near the marina, boarding time at 7 p.m., and the yacht would depart promptly at 7:30. I also reminded everyone to bring their ID for verification, as required by port authorities. When I sent the invites, I kept the tone gentle. If you want a different kind of New Year's Eve, where everyone has a seat, come, I'll take care of the rest. The responses came faster than I ever expected. Grandma May called back almost instantly, her voice trembling. Sweetheart, I never thought I'd see the day I'd be invited like this. I'll be there. Thank you for thinking of me. Aunt Caroline texted with a heart emoji. I'll make the arrangements. I'm definitely coming. Liam wrote, I'm so tired of those parties revolving around one person. Count me in. Zoe was overjoyed. I'm coming, and I'm bringing the whole set of ukuleles to play music. As the messages poured in, a warmth filled me in a way I had never felt before. For the first time, I didn't feel abandoned. Instead, I was the one opening the door. No longer sitting by, waiting for an invitation that might or might not come. I was the one sending the invites, deciding who truly deserved a place. I pictured everyone standing on the yacht's deck, the ocean wind sweeping through, with no main table or side table, no spotlight reserved for just one name. This New Year's Eve, I would do things differently. I would set one long table on the island, where everyone could look each other in the eye and no one's chair would be pushed to the margins. I would let the bronze bell on the dock ring out as the yacht arrived, marking the crossing into a new boundary. In the final days leading up to New Year's Eve, I practically turned the island house into a command center. My desk was covered with contracts, guest lists, and sticky notes scattered across the walls like I was preparing for an international summit. But in truth, all of it was for one purpose: a New Year's Eve party unlike any we had ever known. I wanted every detail to speak one message here: no one would be left behind. I began with the food. I reached out to a chef from New Orleans I had met at a marine conservation event the year before. His name was Marcus, a broad-shouldered man with sun-darkened skin, large but graceful hands, and a smile that always carried the warmth of the South. When I invited him to take part, he laughed heartily. I've never cooked on a private island before. Trust me, Ava, they'll remember this New Year's forever. Together, we built a menu grounded in sustainability. Gulf shrimp cooked in rich, creamy shrimp and grits, oysters roasted until fragrant, fresh seaweed salad, and of course, a chilled, tangy sweet key lime tart, the signature dessert of Florida. I wanted each dish to be more than delicious. I wanted it to tell a story about where we lived, about how the ocean had sustained us all. Music was the next step. I called up some old friends in Miami, Latin jazz musicians who often played in Little Havana. They agreed right away, promising to bring conga drums, saxophones, and smooth vocals to ignite the yacht's deck. After their lively jazz set, I booked a DJ to take over for the countdown. We agreed on the flow. Jazz would open the night, then as the clock inched toward midnight, the DJ would blend in electronic beats, building momentum until the fireworks exploded. I wanted that transition from soft to explosive to become the shared heartbeat of the entire party. I also thought hard about how to make each person feel truly seen. So I had small alloy coins custom-made, one side engraved with the year 2025, the other etched with the image of a wave. I placed them in velvet boxes, neat and orderly, and with each box, I included a handwritten card in my own script. You will always have a seat at my table. As I wrote those words, I thought of each one. Grandma May with her trembling hands, Aunt Caroline with her radiant laugh, Liam who had endured the same feeling I knew too well, and Zoe, the cousin who was always dismissed as too loud. I wanted them to realize that at least here, they would never have to compete for attention. I decided there would be no kids' table like at my parents' parties. On the yacht's upper deck, I planned one long table, covered in white linen, with candles glowing and chairs lined evenly. Children would sit beside adults, hearing and adding their laughter to the conversation, instead of being pushed into a corner as if they didn't matter yet. I knew it would be that simple act of sitting together that would make all the difference. The to-do list grew so long that I had to write out a separate checklist and tape it to my door. The fireworks had to sync perfectly with the music, which meant I needed a separate contract with the pyrotechnics team and had to send them the countdown track in advance so they could program everything. The drone required FAA registration. I filled out the paperwork and got the official number to ensure we'd fly within legal zones, avoiding the restricted airspace around Miami International. I also put together a small media team and gave Zoe the role of managing the night's hashtag. We chose number New Year at Morgan Island for Instagram and TikTok. I told everyone, we don't need to brag, but we don't need to hide either. Let the world see that we can do things differently. And yet, while I was busy with every detail, my family still found ways to throw jabs. One morning, an email popped up from my mother. "You're always so busy, don't strain yourself. We already have solid plans, Brooke will handle everything." The words dripped with implication, as if I always overdid things, as if every effort of mine was never worth acknowledgement. I read it, smirked faintly, and closed the email without replying. At the same time, on Instagram, Brooke posted a photo with the caption, "Morgan Nye family only." The picture showed her in a shimmering dress, Ethan at her side, glass raised high. Her close friends commented, "Perfect as always. Morgan tradition never fails." I looked at it, felt a pang, then let it fade. They could keep their so-called family only. I had another family waiting, those who had been left behind, and I would give them a New Year's Eve that truly meant something. That night, as the Keys wind rushed through the palms, I stepped out onto the dock and wrapped my hand around the rope of the bronze bell. I pulled hard. The sound rang out into the darkness, carrying far across the water like a drumbeat announcing a new boundary crossed. I smiled to myself. Everything was ready. On the afternoon of the 31st of December, Dinner Key Marina in Coconut Grove glowed with lights. The salty ocean air mixed with the chatter of strolling tourists, but in one corner I had set up a small check-in booth with a simple sign. "Morgan Island New Year's Eve boarding here." On the table lay name tags printed on heavy white cardstock with silver trim, each marked with the wave coin logo I had designed. When Grandma May arrived first, wearing a light blue wool coat, her trembling hands holding up the QR code on her phone for the staff to scan, I stepped forward to greet her. They handed her a card that read, "May Morgan. Always a seat." She looked at the words, her eyes brimming with tears. "This is the first time I've ever seen my name printed so beautifully, Ava." I held her hand tight, feeling my heart fill the void left by so many forgotten years. Next came Liam from Atlanta, tall with neatly cropped hair. He didn't say much, he just pulled me into a strong embrace, as if all the resentment, sadness, and distance of the past years had been gathered into that hug. "Thank you for calling us together," he whispered, his eyes shining with a gratitude words could never quite capture. Aunt Caroline arrived with 2 small suitcases, her smile radiant. "I told you, no one does New Year's better than you." My cousin Zoe ran up from Orlando, QR code in one hand, proudly showing off the ukuleles she'd brought in the other. One by one, as each person passed through check-in, they received not just a name card, but something greater, the feeling of being seen, of being recognized. When everyone had arrived, the captain stepped forward in his crisp white uniform, his deep, steady voice carrying as he began the safety briefing. He explained carefully where the life jackets were stored, how to use the life buoys, the maximum number of passengers allowed on board, the emergency exits, and the U.S. Coast Guard regulation that no one should move around until the yacht was fully underway. I stood beside him, nodding. This was not just a party, it was a journey carried out with responsibility. I wanted everyone to feel safe, the exact opposite of all those years when the side table was shoved into the corner, where their presence went unnoticed. Here, every single person was at the center. At exactly 7:30, the ropes were pulled, the 110-foot yacht's engine rumbled softly, and the vessel began cutting through the waves. Sunset washed the sky in shades of pink, the last light of day scattering across Biscayne Bay like shards of broken glass. The warm sea breeze brushed against my face, carrying the scent of salt and the taste of freedom. In the distance, Miami's skyline lit up, the towers glowing one by one like a firework display waiting to burst. I stood on the upper deck, watching the familiar faces around me laughing, and my heart swelled with the certainty that I had done the right thing. At the single long table, with no divisions, everyone raised their glasses of white wine. Grandma May recalled the year she had been left to sit alone in the living room, watching Brooke praised by my parents, while she was dismissed as too old to join the countdown. Aunt Carolyn nodded, adding, "For years, I stopped wanting to go at all, because being there felt like being invisible." Liam gave a bittersweet smile. "I'll never forget the time everyone toasted Brooke's engagement, but when I announced I'd finished my MBA, they just said, 'All right, good job,' then turned to ask what dress she was wearing." The whole deck filled with laughter, sharp and bitter, but also freeing, as if at last there was a place where they could let it all out. Zoe strummed a few playful chords on her ukulele, then burst into laughter. "But this year is different. We're here, all of us, together. No one's forgotten anymore." The table erupted in applause, glasses clinking once again, the sound carrying out across the waves. I quietly stepped back toward the secondary helm, my hand resting on the polished wooden wheel. Watching the city lights fade behind us and the open sea stretch ahead, I whispered just loud enough for myself to hear, "Tonight, no one gets left behind." One hell. The yacht skimmed over the water as the Latin jazz band's lively music pulsed from the main deck, blending with the wind and the waves. I felt the weight of past years dissolve, replaced by a new steadiness. For the first time in my life, I knew with certainty that I was at the helm not only of this vessel, but of my own story, and of the stories of all those who had once been overlooked. As the yacht began to slow, the lights of my island came into view through the night, shimmering like a small jewel set in the sea. A tender boat was waiting, its engine humming softly, the wooden deck spotless, ready to ferry each group of guests to the newly built dock. I went first, stepping onto the side to steady Grandma May as she disembarked. When her feet touched the dock, I gently pulled the rope of the bronze bell. Its sound rang out deep, resonant, carrying across the water like a welcome, like a sign that from this moment forward, all the old boundaries had been left behind at sea. Those coming behind us heard the bell, and for a few seconds everyone fell silent, then instinctively broke into applause, as if they too felt they were stepping into a new chapter. The wooden path leading from the dock to the main house was lined with strands of golden fairy lights, draped along the palms that leaned in the salty wind. As the guests walked up, the glow lit their faces, making every smile, every glance shine brighter. On the wide veranda of the house, a single long table lay waiting, covered in a white cloth. There were no small tables, no side tables. Every chair stood aligned, equal, beneath a canopy of warm string lights that sparkled like a miniature galaxy. The breeze from the bay swept in, carrying the salt of the sea, blending with the aromas rising from the kitchen where Marcus and his team were preparing seafood. When everyone was seated, I stood up. The Latin jazz band on the corner of the veranda softened their playing, leaving the space wrapped in expectant silence. I held the microphone, my voice trembling slightly but clear. I've lived through many New Year's Eves standing behind glass doors, watching others raise their glasses, watching toasts passed around that never once reached me. But tonight, that glass has been thrown open. Everyone here has a seat not because someone granted it, but because we chose to be together. This is our table, one table where everyone is seen and everyone is heard. In just 60 seconds, when I lowered the microphone, the table erupted in applause, joined by warm cries of cheers. The feast began. Marcus and his team carried out steaming trays, hot shrimp and grits, oysters roasted with garlic butter, crisp seaweed salad. Each plate of key lime tart set down at the end drew gasps of surprise at its delicate beauty. I looked around and saw conversations flowing easily, children seated beside adults instead of apart, laughter spreading across the space. At exactly 11:55, the DJ began to lift the tempo, the bass blending with conga drums and saxophone, the atmosphere rising toward a crescendo. Then the moment arrived. When the clock on the deck flashed 11 hours 59 minutes and 45 seconds, I signaled the fireworks team waiting on the island's North Beach. They were licensed professionals, the contract specifying launch times and the quiet hour rules of Monroe County. I wanted brilliance, but I also wanted the law respected. The music synced perfectly, the DJ mixing a remix of Auld Lang Syne, and as the final seconds rang out, 3, 2, 1, the Keys sky exploded with color. Bursts of red, gold, and green lit up the night, shimmering across the water. The crowd shouted in unison, "Happy New Year!" Glasses of wine and mocktails lifted high, laughter and cheers rising to meet the crisp crackle of fireworks. I looked around and realized not a single face was faking a smile. Every person was fully, truly present. When the fireworks ended right on schedule, the sky slowly dimmed, leaving only the glow of fairy lights twinkling above. A calm settled over the table, as if the whole universe had paused to take a deep breath. I gathered everyone close, having hired a local event photographer to capture the moment. We lined up in one long row, Grandma May seated in the center, surrounded by children and grandchildren, every face beaming with joy. It was a real family photo, with no one pushed out of the frame. Then the photographer recorded a 10-second video, everyone shouting together, "Happy New Year" from Morgan Island. As hands lifted high, each holding the engraved wave coin that gleamed silver beneath the lights. I set the photo and video aside, not ready to post them yet. I had already told Zoe, the one managing media, that we would wait for the golden hour on social platforms. Not to boast, but to let the story speak for itself at the right moment. When the picture and clip went live, they wouldn't just be New Year's greetings, they would be proof that another kind of party, another kind of family, existed. And I was certain that when my parents and Brooke saw it, they would understand the world no longer revolved around them. That night, as I left the table and walked out to the dock, the salty sea wind brushed against my cheeks. I pulled the rope of the bronze bell again. Its deep tone echoed outward, this time not only marking a boundary I had crossed, but sounding the beginning of an entirely new chapter for everyone laughing inside the wooden house. The second hand struck midnight, and the yacht's upper deck shook with the roar of voices counting down. The DJ pulled back the tempo, holding the tension tight as a string. 10, 9, 8. The chorus rang out into the wind, blending with the crash of waves against the hull. I stood beside Grandma May, hand in hand, watching Miami's city lights sink farther behind us. 3, 2, 1. The conga drums thundered, the DJ launched into an electronic remix of Auld Lang Syne, and the fireworks burst into life above. Red, gold, and green flares reflected across Biscayne Bay, washing every face in color, radiant in the joy of being together. Adults clinked glasses, children leapt into each other's arms, and everywhere the sound of New Year's kisses filled the air. No one was left on the outside anymore. In that very moment, Zoe and the small media team I had assigned went to work. The best photos were selected, the 10-second Happy New Year from Morgan Island clip was trimmed, and then everything was posted simultaneously on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok with the hashtag number New Year at Morgan Island. Within minutes, the posts were already racking up hundreds of likes from friends and colleagues of everyone at the party. Grandma May, with Zoe's help holding her phone, uploaded a trembling story, a picture of her sitting right in the center of the long table, her eyes sparkling. She wrote, "The first time I've ever sat at the middle, not the corner. Thank you, Ava." Just one short line, but for me, it was the greatest victory of all. The ripple effect came faster than I ever expected. Less than 15 minutes after the fireworks lit up the sky, my phone on the deck started buzzing nonstop. At first, it was my mother's number 1, 2, then 3 missed calls. Then my father. Then Brooke, her texts firing off in rapid succession. "Where is this? Why weren't we invited? What are you doing, Ava? Who gave you permission to use the family name for this stunt?" It didn't stop there. Their friends, even neighbors from Fort Lauderdale, started messaging. "We just saw the video. Is that your island? Why didn't we hear anything about a family party?" Some even sent angry emojis, one comment reading, "Family only? Then what are we?" Each time the phone buzzed, it felt like the old years were trying to drag me back to that cold seat at the side table. But this time, I didn't let it win. Calmly, I opened my settings and silenced every notification. The vibration stopped, giving way to the soaring music and the sound of waves lapping against the hull. I took a deep breath, as though I had just lifted an invisible weight from my chest. I picked up the gray wool shawl I had prepared earlier and draped it gently over Grandma May's shoulders. She turned to me, smiling, taking my hand, her eyes damp but shining with peace. "Don't let anyone make you forget tonight, Ava," she whispered. I nodded, lifting my gaze to the sky. The last of the fireworks were fading, each spark falling like a dying star, leaving behind a smooth stretch of night. We stood together, saying nothing more. Jazz music rose again from the lower deck, lively yet warm. On the morning of New Year's Day, sunlight streamed through the glass windows of the quays, spilling across the wooden floor scented with sea salt and the faint smoke from the fireworks. I sat at the long table, still marked with the rings of wine glasses, a steaming cup of coffee in my hand. The phone in the center of the table blinked relentlessly, calls from my mother, then my father, then Brooke. I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. This time, I chose to put it on speaker so I wouldn't be the only one to hear. Grandma May, Aunt Caroline, and Liam were already gathered around, their eyes fixed on the screen like they were waiting for a public trial. I pressed accept. My mother's voice burst out immediately, sharp and breathless. "Ava, you've humiliated us. All of Fort Lauderdale is talking. They're asking why we aren't in the photos. Do you know how many messages I've gotten from friends? Everyone thinks this family has fallen apart." I drew in a long breath, steadying my voice. "Mom, I only did exactly what you told me, do you remember? Just your sister's side this time." I didn't argue, I only followed. On the other end, there was a pause, then my father cut in, his voice low, measured, as if trying to stay in control. "What your mother and I meant was, just to keep things simple. Every year it gets too crowded, too much fuss. This year we wanted it smaller. It wasn't about leaving you out." I gave a faint smile, but before I could answer, Grandma May tapped the table firmly, her voice raspy yet sharp. "Simple, or just simpler not to see that child? I've lived long enough to know when someone's being pushed aside on purpose. You can't hide behind excuses anymore." The table went still. I could hear heavy breathing on the line, and then Brooke's voice sliced through, sharp and bitter. "Don't make a big deal out of this, Ava, it's just tradition. Every year, New Year's Eve is for immediate family. Why are you turning it into a problem this time?" I let out a soft laugh, no longer bitter, only resolute. Tradition? Tradition is never an excuse to forget people. If a tradition forces someone to sit outside the glass, watching from the cold with no seat at the table, then it isn't tradition anymore. It's cruelty. 1. I looked around the table. Grandma May gripping my hand tighter, Aunt Caroline nodding with tears in her eyes, Liam clenching his jaw but his gaze burning bright. They all heard it, they all knew, and for the first time in years, the truth was spoken aloud, no longer swallowed in silence. On the other end, my mother's voice broke. You're turning this family into a joke." My father tried to seize control. "Ava, turn off the speaker. This isn't something for outsiders to hear." I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and pressed the button to end the call. The sound of the line disconnecting echoed in the room, cutting off ties that had stretched far too long. The space fell silent for a few seconds. Then Grandma May spoke, her voice shaky but steady. "You did the right thing. Setting boundaries doesn't destroy a family. It's how you keep yourself whole and how you teach others to see your worth." I nodded, my heart suddenly light, as if I had finally laid down a stone I'd been carrying for 30 years. I looked out through the glass, where the first light of the new year shimmered across the water. In my mind, one thought rang clear. From now on, I would never be the one standing behind the glass again. I had thrown it wide open, and on the other side was a different kind of family, the people who truly chose to sit with me. A week after the fireworks, when the photos and videos from the island party had spread across social media, I drafted a short message and sent it directly to my parents and Brooke. "Saturday night, come to the island. Immediate family only, just as you asked." I didn't wait for a reply. They read it, the little scene appeared, and then silence. But on the appointed night, their familiar SUV turned slowly into the gravel lot near the dock, its tires crunching to a stop. My father stepped out first, tall and lean, still neat in a pale shirt, but his eyes no longer carried the sharp criticism they once did. My mother followed, clutching her shawl tightly, her posture slightly withdrawn. Brooke came last, her high heels sinking lightly into the wooden dock. All three of them hesitated, as if they were arriving in a foreign place, though they knew full well this island was mine. I went to greet them not with hugs, not with anger, just a nod, my voice even. "Come in. Tonight it's no one else, just us." Dinner was prepared simply, no jazz band, no DJ, only candles on the long table and the sound of waves breaking against the veranda. I deliberately sat across from them, so I could look each of them directly in the eye. As the first course was set down, I began to speak. Not with raised voice, not in argument, but as if I were reading aloud a file that had never been opened. I told them about the New Year's Eves of my childhood, when I stood in the kitchen washing dishes, listening to laughter and clinking glasses in the living room, every toast calling only Brooke's name. I told them how it felt to be pushed to the side table year after year, as if my presence was nothing but excess. I spoke of the times they dismissed my accomplishments, my science award, my scholarship, the hours spent in the lab only to turn back and celebrate Brooke for being cheer captain or for landing a job at a law firm. Then I shifted to my journey forward, the years in Gainesville, the days in Key Largo working on marine technology, the nights in Miami surviving on instant noodles on a couch. I explained why I had to start my own company, why I sold part of Seapulse, and why I chose to buy this island through a hidden company. "Not because I wanted distance," I said steadily, "but because I knew if you found out, you would turn it into Brooke's story. Like every time before." My tone wasn't sharp, it was simply the truth, laid plainly on the table. At last, I spoke about the New Year's Eve we had just celebrated. Why I had opened the island to the part of the family who had been left out: Grandma, May, Liam, Caroline, Zoe. I made it clear. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it to prove that we can have one single table where everyone has a place. It's just that you never wanted to try. The air grew heavy. My father lowered his head, turning the stem of his glass between his fingers. After a long silence, he exhaled. "Maybe I didn't see. Or I refused to see. And that was my fault." My mother looked up, her eyes glistening, her voice soft but sincere. "I'm sorry. I never realized it weighed so heavily. I always thought you were strong, that you could handle yourself. But maybe that's why I left you alone." It was clumsy, incomplete, but at least it was real. Brooke had been silent the whole time, her eyes fixed on the table. Finally, she lifted her head, lips pressed tight. I didn't think it was that heavy for you. To me, it was just tradition." I looked straight at her, my voice measured. "Any tradition that forces someone to spend 15 years standing outside the glass isn't tradition anymore. It's just an excuse to forget people." Brooke bit her lip, saying nothing more, but I saw her gaze falter for the first time, stripped of her usual certainty. The dinner ended without hugs, without radiant smiles that could erase the past. But when they left, there was at least an acknowledgement. No more denial, no more shifting blame. Just a pause long enough to respect boundaries, and for me, that was enough. Late that night, after clearing away the dinner table, I sat alone on the wooden veranda, staring out over the bay. The Keys breeze drifted softly, carrying the scent of salt and damp air. On the table beside me lay my phone. I opened the extended family group chat, a thread that since this New Year's Eve had been alive with messages so different from the silence of years past. I typed a single line, plain and unadorned, no need for explanation. "Next year, Morgan Island will open again. Anyone who truly wants to come there will always be a seat." Within less than a minute, notifications began lighting up. A red heart from Zoe, fireworks from Liam, a sailboat from Aunt Caroline, and a cascade of celebratory icons from other cousins. I laughed aloud, a weight inside me lifting as if I had finally cut loose a heavy anchor. I knew my parents and Brooke would need more time, and I wasn't going to force it. The boundary had been set, and that boundary would be the foundation for any bond, if it was ever to be rebuilt, to stand in a healthy way. I didn't need a perfect family. I only needed to know no one would ever be left behind again. The waves lapped gently against the dock, echoing my thoughts. I rose, walked to the edge of the veranda, and wrapped my hand around the rope of the bronze bell. With a firm pull, I let it ring. The deep, resonant sound rolled out into the still night, each toll a declaration. I had crossed a boundary, and from here on, I would live life on my own terms. If someone out there is listening to this story, I just want to say, you don't need to wait for an invitation to know your worth. You can build your own table, with seats for those who truly want to be there. Any tradition that forces you to feel small, let it go. Any relationship that only survives when you bend and beg, set a boundary. When you dare to create your own table, you'll see, the ones who are meant to stay will find their way to you, and the rest will simply fall out of the frame. I released the rope, the bell's echo fading until only the soft whisper of the key's wind remained. A new year had begun, and for the first time in my life, I felt I was stepping into it not with empty hands, but with a true family, a family built on choice, on respect, and on love that was finally healthy.